Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just wrapped up talking about some of these early storylines surrounding the Super Bowl, from what it looks like for head coach Kyle Shanahan and whether or not he can have his redemption after a little bit of a narrative surrounding him that he can't win the big games has been surrounding him since 2017. We talked about what it would mean for Mahomes, Reed, and the Chiefs for if they were to win a Super Bowl this year. But as we continue to talk about them over the coming weeks, I do want to sort of close the chapter on the 2023-24 season for the Lions and the Ravens. These two teams lost, obviously, in the championship weekend. And it felt like America, for the most part, unless you had any sort of personal affinity to the Chiefs and the Niners, these were the two teams that people were rooting for. Everybody loves the underdog story, and I know that the Ravens were actually favored in this game somewhat significantly by kickoff. It was the idea of knocking down these two Goliaths of sort of the 49ers and the Chiefs. The Niners, one of the greatest franchises in the history of the NFL, have been such a prominent team in the NFC Championship game of the past few years, and had made it to a Super Bowl where they played the Chiefs, who are now in the AFC Championship game every year and already have a couple Super Bowls, including last season. So these two teams in the Lions and the Ravens were sort of America's pick, and they suffered some pretty heartbreaking losses. And I don't want to be cynical and, get on their cases too much, but I just sort of want to take a look at where did these two teams go from here after kind of being the ones that come up on the short end, as they had the more to lose, I should say, than their respective counterparts and the champions of their conferences. So the Ravens obviously had a chance to get the Chiefs in a year where they have home field advantage and the Chiefs seemed vulnerable, but their MVP-led offense just couldn't get enough done. The Lions making it to the NFC Championship game, the franchise's first conference championship game since 1991, still yet to make it to the Super Bowl, and they had a 17-point lead going into halftime. That obviously falls apart, marking the largest collapse in NFC Championship history. So, moving forward for these teams, what is the likelihood they can find themselves in this same position, like hopefully for them better results, but in this position next year? It's interesting to ask because Dan Campbell, we mentioned it on the show yesterday, immediately when he came out for his post-game press conference, he said that what he told his locker room was, this may have been our only shot. And he went on to explain the reality of the NFL, which is once you reach this stage of the championship weekend game and you're a participant in that, you're not sneaking up on anybody anymore. Last year, the Lions sort of turned it around late in the year. They had that big final win on Sunday Night Football of being able to knock out their division rival out of the playoffs and sort of end their season on a high note despite not making the playoffs themselves. And then coming into this year, they were sort of that fun buzz team for a while, talking about the fact that they are a fun team, these scrappy Lions. Dan Campbell, he's a crazy person, but he has that locker room bought in, and they were just a fun story for a while. And they had some big wins, and they had some losses, like when they lost to the Ravens, and they got pummeled by them. And they lose a close one to the Dallas Cowboys. And despite putting together a good season, a lot of people sort of viewed them as a second-tier franchise within the NFC contenders. And the idea of the Detroit Lions of all franchises being able to put together a Super Bowl run just didn't really seem that realistic, and here they were just so close to being able to do so. So, for both teams, they're going to have targets on their back. They're not going to catch anybody off guard. They know how talented the players on the roster are, the buy-in from the coaches. I think, say what you want about Dan Campbell because of his fourth down decisions, still probably one of the best coaches in the NFL. Maybe a little bit of a statement on the general consensus of a lot of these head coaches. But again, I think the buy-in and having the locker room is the first thing you have to do to have success. Dan Campbell has more than enough showed that he can do that. The Lions' upcoming free agents, just to sort of put into perspective what their roster is going to look like next season. It's not as bad as you may think because they've been incredible drafting over the past couple years, including this year where they were so heavily scrutinized for drafting Jahmyr Gibbs in the early teens. It was 12th or 13th. Then you take Jack Campbell, who maybe wasn't quite as high on a lot of draft experts' boards. They go out, they get Laporta, they get Brian Branch. All four of those players in the first two rounds were home run hits, is maybe a little aggressive, but all of them were key contributors for them this season, were making plays in the regular season and playoffs and got them to the NFC Championship game. So already four starters there that they have locked down. Aleem McNeil was a third-round pick a couple years ago. He's developed into a massive piece for them. Aiden Hutchinson, obviously the second overall pick from a couple drafts ago, the 2022 draft. So they've done a very good job of homegrown talent and getting guys on their books long term. So the upcoming free agents for them, all of that being said, it is two starting linemen. They have both of their starting guards, Graham Glasgow and Jonah Jackson. Jonah Jackson missed the NFC Championship game with an injury. The offensive line, obviously, a massive part of the Detroit Lions. So it's going to be pretty crucial for them to address that situation one way or another. Vaitai, I'm not even going to try and pronounce his first name right now. He started for them a couple years, but he was dealing with injuries, and then he didn't end up working his way back into the starting role. He is also an expiring free agent, so they're going to have to figure something out there. Josh Reynolds, I know he might not be the most popular guy in Detroit after a couple of crucial drops in this past game, but he had a good season for them, over 600 yards, 5 touchdowns in the regular season. He had 80 in their playoff, 80 receiving yards, that is, in their playoff game against the Rams, and a touchdown the week after against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and then some defenders, Jerry Jacobs, CJ Gardner-Johnson, and Benito Jones. So, a handful of starters, but ultimately nobody extremely prominent for them. I think that this offseason, the conversation more stems around the two leaders of their offense that are going into expiring contracts next season. That is quarterback Jared Goff and stud wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown. They're both coming up on the final years of their deals, and you're going to have to pay them, probably extend them this offseason, I would assume. Amon-Ra, it's a no-brainer for me. You have to bring that guy back. And then Jared Goff, I think at this point, he's probably done everything you have asked him to do. And, I actually didn't mind the pick of Hendon Hooker in the prior draft where I'm like, oh, this is a good job where Hooker, a little bit of an older guy coming off of an injury. Jared Goff is the perfect bridge quarterback, but I think Goff has shown that he's more than that at this point. He was very good in their playoff run and probably going to be making a lot of money come this next payday, but I think that it's warranted. And then more big news for the Rams came today where their offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, informed the Seahawks and Commanders he plans to stay with the Lions. He was a hot head coaching candidate, but he said he wants to come back and win a Super Bowl for the Lions. Gotta love that if you're a Lions fan. I think that is huge. Briefly touching on the Ravens here. They have a handful of pretty significant upcoming free agents. Patrick Queen, who's coming off of his rookie deal, one of the best young players at his linebacker position. All-pro defensive tackle Justin Madubuike is an upcoming free agent. Some more key defenders between Jadeveon Clowney, Geno Stone, Ronald Darby, and Kyle Van Noy. Both of their starting guards, John Simpson and Kevin Zeitler. And some of their complementary offensive guys, Gus Edwards, OBJ, and Nelson Aguilar. So, it's a lot of names that I just named right there, and a lot of guys that played very significant minutes for them this season. Now, you have to have faith in the infrastructure of John Harbaugh and Lamar Jackson, who Lamar, soon to be two-time MVP Lamar Jackson, despite the playoff shortcomings, you have to have faith that that core can bring you back to a similar position. This was far and away the most open the AFC has been for them up to this point. Across their division in the AFC North, excluding Lamar, the most amount of games played from a starting quarterback was just 12, with Kenny Pickett starting that for the Steelers. Joe Burrow only started 10. Deshaun Watson started 6. So the AFC North was wide open for them. The Chiefs seemed extremely vulnerable even as late as December, where they get stonewalled by the Raiders and their offense looks terrible. And Baltimore, the city, is now hosting their first AFC championship game since 1971, when the team playing wasn't even the Baltimore Ravens franchise, it was the Baltimore Colts. And you lose that game. You hope that, they still have a handful of talented young players, and I'm sure they're going to be able to bring back some of the likes of Patrick Queen. You have to bring back. Justin Madubuike, I think, is very important to bring back. And Geno Stone has been a huge pickup for them. Took him in the 7th round a few years ago, and he has been extremely valuable. I know you have Kyle Hamilton as another safety, so maybe you feel like you can try and maybe spend that money at a different position, but I like Geno Stone a lot myself. Now, you hope that Zay Flowers is just going to get better. He had a very impressive rookie season. Hope that he gets better, maybe a little bit more mature as well. You still have Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews through next season, so can try and put some extra receiver talent around Lamar Jackson. We saw how much better he was when he had a legitimate number one receiver. There's plenty of talent on both sides of the ball, but again, you have to look at this year a little bit and be like, how did we let that one slip away? And I think that myself and a lot of people know Lamar wasn't great in the second half, but it really felt like if they could redo that game as far as play calling, we definitely could have seen a different result. But that's not how it works. It's a one and done situation in the NFL, which is what makes it so chaotic and yet so fun at the same time. So those are my final thoughts on both of these teams. I'm sure that they will be back in some capacity next season, and we'll be getting more into expectations for them and all of that. One last note on the Ravens. Mike Macdonald is interviewing for these head coaching positions, so we'll see whether or not they have their defensive coordinator for next season. But that is all for those two teams right now. We're going to be taking one last final break here, and when we come back on the other side, we are going to be talking about the NBA. That was it was nuts last night. If you didn't watch and you are a basketball fan, I feel a little bit bad for you because it was a lot of fun. So one final break and we will be back and talking about the NBA.